Celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Okay, we got Matt, the Sniper Shearer.
Oh, starting already.
Listen, dude, I'm so happy to have you here. We've known each other I was trying to actually figure it out, but it's over 10 years. But we don't get a chance to really sit down and have these kinds of conversations. And it's funny when you Wikipedia your name, and I don't know if you've ever done this because I've never done my name. So I figured, I'm sure you haven't because you're so modest. But you come up like the Sniper Shearer, the lacrosse player, and you're a professional lacrosse player, which you were. But
it was past
tense. This was a long time ago, right? Because you ended that in
finished lacrosse in 2007.
2007, yeah. So played for the Raptors. I think actually you played. I didn't know you back then, but you played when I had seasons tickets. Actually, I think.
Oh, no way.
I was trying to chunk out the years and going, because I was super broke back then, so I couldn't afford Leafs tickets, couldn't afford Raptors tickets. So I was like, we'll get lacrosse tickets.
Yeah, that was probably 04 or something, 07, I think. So it was my time in Toronto, and before that, played in a few different spots in the U.S. But 10 years in playing professional lacrosse on the box side. Played some field lacrosse and that as well. But yeah, it was pretty cool to be able to, the fact that you can do that for a living. But I had other stuff going on the side, but just be able to do that as a passion was a pretty cool experience.
Well, I mean, you didn't just have a little bit of things going on the side. And I really actually wanted to because when I was doing the math on your lacrosse and then started connecting it. So, I mean, you're also known, so your nickname was the Sniper in lacrosse, but around town and the people that we know, it's the Under Armour guy, Matt, the Under Armour guy. And so, I mean, you built your whole career on Under Armour, and I'm like fascinated to dig into that. But I think you were doing Under Armour and you were playing professional lacrosse at the same time, I think.
Yeah, for a large part of my career on doing both. Yeah, it was kind of overlapping, which was cool. Like you said, just to be able to kind of build a career at the start. It was, selling t-shirts and shoes and playing some lacrosse on the side, but having fun doing both of them and just, kind of building a career and letting it turn into whatever it would at the time. And eventually it got to a point where the more professional side on the business with Under Armour started to take a bit more time, and, had to pass on some of the lacrosse eventually and focus on the career from an Under Armour standpoint. But that afforded me a ton of opportunity as well, moving and traveling around. So,
yeah. So, look, I know where you ended or I believe I know, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you were running North America for Under Armour, like a $3.5 or $4 billion enterprise.
Yeah, I was running all the operational side of things, so-called COO-ish of the North American market, running the Canadian P&L, and then started plugging into more stuff in the U.S. Eventually took on a lot of the operational stuff in the U.S. as well. The person that was running North America at the time had left. So then I think one of my last gigs was being more of the interim person running North America, hired somebody on to run that. And then I made a probably pretty tough decision to leave, which I can get into at some point. But yeah, tough decision to leave. Just a lot of travel over my 20 plus years with the brand, and it took a toll on. Didn't take a toll, but it was hard. Having young kids. Eventually it was something I had to make a decision where I was going to make myself more present, and that was being more present as a husband and a dad. So made a tough call to leave after 20 plus years, and definitely the right decision. But I also miss the people, the team, the business, the brand a ton.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you do. Like, it's a freaking amazing brand. Yeah. I mean, I've been sending a letter every year for a sponsorship, and I've never gotten a response. I'm kidding. I actually love the brand. I'm a massive fan of the brand. Like, I have Under Armour, like all my workout gear is Under Armour. Like, I wear it around the house all the time. I'm a huge fan of the brand, actually. And I think you guys did a great job at rolling that thing out through the 2000s. But can you just kind of share with, me, but the audience? I mean, I have an idea, but I'm certain I don't have the full picture. How did it start for you, and roll that out a little bit?
Yeah. So I would typically started out by saying, I grew up, locally here outside Toronto, Whitby area, and was always just a kid playing sports, grew up around sports all my life. And that's what kind of framed me. That's what held me accountable. to things, largely playing hockey and lacrosse, and eventually got to a point where I started playing more lacrosse and had the opportunity to go down and go to school in the US and go to college after high school and play lacrosse in college. And that's what kind of opened up a lot of different things for me. Just to continue a passion of playing lacrosse, and growing up here, play a lot of box lacrosse and started figuring out what field lacrosse was, but then went down to the US, went to school, moved myself down to Baltimore, Maryland, and ended up going to school, studied psychology, and played lacrosse at within the NCAA, which ended up playing for some good programs in that. Played as close down to a Final Four in that within the lacrosse realm. So it was pretty cool, and just got a chance to play lacrosse, which held me accountable to what my grades were. And I don't think I studied psychology to be a psychologist. It was more just taking something that I enjoyed, and got the degree in psychology. And then once I finished, there was this professional lacrosse league, the NLL, that was out there, and ended up getting drafted by the local team in Baltimore. And so started playing professional lacrosse in Baltimore. And coming out of that, there was a friend of mine that I'd played lacrosse with, played some club field lacrosse, played in Baltimore on the box side together, and actually played against each other in college. A guy by the name of Kip Folks, who was Kevin Plank, who was the founder of Under Armour, was his first partner. Okay. So we were buddies, and we'd be going out after practice and grabbing a bite to eat and having a beer, and he'd always be taken off because he had to go and finish up some stuff from work, which at the time, was this startup t-shirt company.
Yeah, but how old are you at this time?
At this time, this would have been maybe I was probably 28, 29 years old, maybe.
Okay. So you're done like school.
That. So finished school. Maybe I was not old. I was probably maybe 25, 26 years old, maybe something like that. But yeah, so we just, started hanging out, and we'd be going and tailgating at Ravens games, and, spending time together, playing lacrosse, got to be good friends, doing stuff outside of playing lacrosse. And eventually I was ready to get into a bit more from a career standpoint, but didn't want to come back to Canada. So got them to sponsor me, get me a work visa. And I became this kind of, token glorified non-Canadian that, got tasked with doing a lot of the stuff outside the US. So started selling lacrosse and that for them. So first started working and selling some of the local lacrosse, shops and that in Maryland and Mid-Atlantic, East Coast. And then we had a distributor in Japan. So they were like, Matt, go figure out these guys in Japan, make sure that, they understand the brand and, everything kind of resonates over there. So started managing Japan, and we took what was a football story with guys wearing tight t-shirts. We took that over to Japan and focused on baseball and told the same story, just through a different lens, and started building that up. And then they said, well, what about Canada? Go figure out Canada. So then started, set up a distributor, and we had a distributor in Canada for a little while, where I started building the business. Again, same thing, same story, just through the lens of hockey. And, so really took that same message and brand story and just applied it through a different lens and different sport that was relevant to the consumer, which was cool. Canadian business, proximity to the US obviously is a lot, closer than Japan. That business started to pick up and grow. So challenged our distributor to make a bit of investment in some people, some inventory, and some marketing. And I think the timing just wasn't right for them to do that. So we ended up taking it back and set up a subsidiary. And that had me coming home to set up the office and start building the team of people. And that was back in 2001, I think. So early days, this was just such a fun thing to reflect on, because there was probably only about, maybe 25 of us, in the company. We were doing about $2 million in business globally with Under Armour.
That's a small business, like relatively small business.
Yeah. It started in 96. And by the time like 2000, 2001, we were doing about $2 million. And we just, started to scale, and I came up to Canada, set up the business in Canada, and again, started telling that story through hockey and building out the team, building out the business, the distribution. And eventually then things started to grow in other parts of the world. So, as I started plugging into meetings and I started asking, well, what's going on with this and what's going on with that? And I think by asking questions, it kind of just continued to give me more responsibility. They were like, well, that's a good question. Why don't you go figure that out? So it's funny, over the years when I'd have interviews, I'd be interviewing people for different roles. And then one of the questions that people would always ask, they'd say, well, what's the coolest part about working for the brand, about working with Under Armour? And for me, I always just loved the autonomy and that people were given, should they be willing to take it, and just really applying an entrepreneurial mindset to really writing your own job description at times. Because, it was such a fast growing business. If there was something happening, you had the opportunity to kind of get your hands out there, put your hands around it and make something of it. So it was running Canada. Then, there wasn't really much being done to manage what we were building out within parts of Latin America. So we had a distributor in Mexico and a couple of others. So then they said, Shearer, why don't you go figure this out? So I continued to run Canada, picked up Mexico, Latin America. I think then added Australia, New Zealand. So had basically built out the Americas as a region. So started running that for a few years. And then there was some change happening within the business in Europe. And probably the largest sporting goods retailer in Europe at the time, Intersport, was one of our bigger partners over there. And one of our biggest partners in Canada at the time, the Fresani Group, owned the North American license to Intersport. So as it relates to how that business was structured, was managed, I probably knew more about that than anyone in the US and a lot of the people in Europe at the time, just based on the maturity of the Canadian business. So I was asked to come over there just to sit in some meetings, just to kind of vet what the opportunity was, how we should manage it. So I went over there with Kevin Plank, our CEO, and sat in a meeting and kind of got an update on what was happening with the business. We came out of it and Kevin was like, all right, so what do we do? And I kind of laid it out. I said, well, buying groups, they've got them at country level, international level. We should set up this, hire people, do this, that, and the other. And I think 2 months later, I was moving to Amsterdam with my wife and kids. And we moved over there to.
Oh my God. How, sorry. Okay. So let me get perspective on this just for myself, but for the audience too. So you start with Under Armour, you come out of school, you're playing lacrosse, you start with Under Armour and you got a psychology degree and really don't know anything necessarily about business, really.
Yeah. Degree in psychology and lacrosse.
Yeah. And then you're selling shirts and just working away with these guys, and they're doing how much in revenue at that time when you first start with them?
I think we're doing about $2 million.
You're doing about $2 million. Okay. That's when you first started. Yeah. And then you just start picking things up. They start asking a bunch of questions, and then you just kind of forge your path into the company of Under Armour, and then just keep one opportunity leads to another, team leads to another. It's the Americas, it's Europe,
Yeah, I think part of it was, just by having some intellectual curiosity, by going and asking the questions and trying to plug myself into various parts of the business. So I think the other parts was, as I plugged in, we saw some things performing in those areas. So I think I had an understanding of what we were doing as a brand. And I think when it started, it was a group of athletes, really. Kevin, the founder, was a walk-on football player at University of Maryland. His first partner, Kip, was a lacrosse player at Maryland. His other partner, guy Ryan Wood, was a football player, played at Arizona State, and then ended up in some teams in the NFL for a period. So it was really, at the early days, it was very much a locker room mindset in just how things were communicated and how everybody held each other accountable. Everybody, was in there with a purpose and a will in order to win and in order to do the right thing. And, it was just, we just held each other accountable as teammates. And I think that's just something that really resonated with me as far as how you work together in a group environment like that. And I think it is something that's carried through my entire career, not just at the start of it, but it's carried through my entire career. If I was to think about my leadership style, it's very much been drawn off of my sports background or my involvement in team sports. And how that works, whether it's, how I act within the team, how I lead within the team, and just how you structure the team. A big thing that, learning that came from it. And I think you and I had talked about this in the past at the golf course was, we used to talk a lot about how we'd structure the business, and from a sports perspective, carrying that into business. If you had sales and marketing as like the offense, finance and operations as the defense, you got IT and HR as like special teams. The P&L basically becomes the scoreboard. You got to write the right plays and write playbook in order to put points on the board. That playbook becomes your accountability to kind of go through all your different departments. And that's how we manage the business, was just, making sure you had the roster filled with the right people. If there are free agents out there, we'd go and get them and we put them in the right place and make sure you're building out the right team and put points on the board to ultimately win.
That sounds simple. I'm sure, obviously it's a lot of work. But it sounded like I can just imagine it would have been a blast back then, driving this, a bunch of locker room like mentality and just pushing and driving and holding each other account. I love, like, just the sound of it sounds like it's awesome.
It was fun. Like I said, it was a good group good group of largely guys, and we'd bring in the right people. It was whether it was male, female. We started to build out a broader team, and but again, it was a lot of athletes. A lot of the women that we hired on the team were other like lacrosse players or athletes, in that from a college perspective. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I think at the time, I don't know that there was as much of a vision as to where it was that we were going. We were going and we were going forward, but I don't think there was a vision to where it has ultimately gotten, where that brand has ultimately gotten to. But, you know, joining there in like early 2000s, and then by 2005, I think it was 2005, company went public on the NASDAQ. A year later, it flipped over onto New York Stock Exchange. So, that forced us to grow up pretty quickly as far as just all the different, governance and structure and whatnot we had to do in order to manage the business accordingly. But that was a good thing. Helped, just to continue. There's another accountability check, make sure that we were doing things right. And I think that's another thing that's helped me just frame my thought process of just, other businesses had to have an operating rhythm in place. What are you doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? Just the accountability that being a public company puts on you doesn't just apply to public companies. In my mind, it's a great way to run a business, and how you're keeping a scoreboard in place to make sure that you're doing the things that you said you want to do.
Yeah. So can we maybe I just have a couple of quick questions about, well, not a couple of quick ones. They might be longer, but this pre-IPO Under Armour and this post-IPO Under Armour, because essentially big difference between running a public company and running a private company. And when you're going from 2 million to 10 million, and we have a lot of listeners that have businesses in that kind of 2 to 10 million, and moving from 2 to 10 up to 20, 40, 80, $100 million takes a much different type of style, leadership, strategy, all that kind of stuff. So in the early days, and especially you coming from as an athlete, as a professional athlete, coming from, and you're doing that, like I'm kind of a little bit blown away that you're playing professional lacrosse while you're a key integral member of building out Under Armour as a brand in different countries. Like it's crazy. So I get like, actually a question that's in my mind is, you come to Toronto and I think you started playing in 04 in Toronto.
I think it was 03 or 04. I think it was 04.
Yeah,
so
03, 04.
Yeah. So I played in Baltimore. So I started working with Under Armour, was playing lacrosse for the NLL team in Baltimore.
Right. Yep.
And started shortly after that, started working with Under Armour. So I was doing them both kind of the same. The team in Baltimore ended up moving. The owner ended up moving it to Pittsburgh. So same group of guys, but instead of playing in Baltimore, we were commuting to Pittsburgh. So we'd go to Pittsburgh for all our home games and commute to whatever other city for the away games. The same guy then brought it back to Washington. So then we started playing in Washington, DC. So same group of guys, Baltimore to Pittsburgh, back into Washington. Played in Washington for a couple of years. And then he ended up selling the team to Stan Kroenke and moved the team to what exists now is still the Colorado Mammoth within that league. Was previous to that was the Washington team that I had played for, and they'd moved there. So then we started commuting to Colorado, and that very quickly became a little bit too much. And as that's growing, Under Armour and some of my responsibility, and obviously time is growing within, business responsibility. So I was like, I don't know if I can do that. I ended up getting picked up and traded to a team in New York. So I ended up playing in Long Island for a New York team in the league for 1 year. Still living in Baltimore, so then commuting back and forth to New York for games. And then this was the time when I started getting to the point where I was moving back to Canada to set up our subsidiary business. So once that season ended, I was a free agent. I knew all the guys in Toronto from the coaching staff, and a lot of players are guys that I had grown up playing either with or against. So ended up getting picked up in Toronto, and it was a pretty smooth transition settling into things there. And
it's wild to me that you were playing professional lacrosse and like driving the Canadian business. Like, I mean, if you think about it, like I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm playing a professional sport and I'm trying to build cause you guys grew pretty well in Canada in the beginning, right?
Yeah. I think we got it up to as much as about $400 million from nothing to about 400 million. And but playing lacrosse at the same time. But again, it was in some ways it helped because that was our consumer. So just staying close to the game, whether it was playing and just being involved with the NLL and getting product on players, so there was a kind of a marketing aspect that helped, and that cascaded down through, minor lacrosse. It kept me close to things. The Leafs was one of the first NHL teams that we had, and the equipment manager there, Brian Papineau, was one of the first to kind of pull us in. And then working with guys like Domi and Roberts and that at the times were, huge supporters of the brand. So it gave me an opportunity at the time at ACC. I was in the building a lot and was able to kind of rub elbows with those guys and, get the product in there, which helped us then grow broadly into the NHL and getting into NHL locker rooms too. So
yeah, it's a genius. I mean, I don't know if you were playing for that purpose, if it was just more of a passion, but it just ended up resulting in a great place to, proximity is everything, right? I mean, proximity is power, as they say.
yeah. And I don't know that I had as much foresight or as much of a plan at that point to do all these things, but everything was it was like, all right, well, what are we going to do next? And you found a way. You figured out how to kind of make that next step. And I think as the business grew, in order to continue to grow and to take share and to get into some of these other categories that we wanted to get into at Under Armour, it took a lot more planning and foresight in order to do that, to make sure we were doing it with the right products. We were focused on the right consumer. We were putting the right marketing spends in place. So as it grew, it obviously becomes harder, to grow that business. But the playing lacrosse afforded a ton of opportunity just to lend to the authenticity of how we were positioning the product.
Yeah, it's awesome. Smart, really smart. So I'm curious, what would you say to you come to Canada? Well, I mean, you start with Under Armour and they're $2 million business and they just grow and grow, but you come to Canada and you basically started Canada from $0 to $400 million. And I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit about, things like leadership, where you kind of fall on that, where it was back then, where you see it is today. And then I'd really also like to just chat maybe a little bit about, people who have companies, some of the things that they miss or some of the learning lessons that you made where maybe you guys missed and went, you know what, when we learned this lesson, it really made a difference and it changed our business. And it was able to help us catapult. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about because I know you have a great family. I know that complexity of your travel. I'm really excited to dive into some of this stuff with you, man.
It's interesting. If I reflect back on some of the learnings, leadership was probably one of the biggest kind of growth areas that I could look at reflecting on. I think business wise, my 20 years with a brand that grew as much and as fast as it did, it was like it was like getting an MBA. It was like going to school, the amount that I learned about business. I was never a sales guy. I was never a marketing guy. Not a finance guy. I would consider myself more of an operator. I liked spending the time aligning all those pipes cross-functionally and making sure that everything was well connected, that there weren't silos within the business. I understand marketing, I understand brand, but I'm not a classically trained marketer. I understand sales and managing relationships, and I can manage a P&L. But again, I'm not an expert in any of those areas. It was more about, again, that sports analogy. It was about crafting the right team and then just making sure you had the right, people on the ice or on the field at the right time in order to complete what it was that you were trying to do. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I think evolved in my time at Under Armour. I think originally, I think even still now, I'm very much a player coach. I like to be involved. I like to roll up my sleeves. I like to get my hands dirty with things. I don't think I micromanage. I just like to be involved. I like to be in the play. I like to be in the meetings to know what's going on. And I think when I made the shift back in 2012 and went over to Europe, that was what opened my eyes to things. And it was a big unlock. I'd never been to Europe before. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, you want to come over here and, fix this, maybe distressed business in a sense, restructure it. We were doing business in about 25 markets, of which I'd never been to any of them. And came over there. We had sales agents in some areas. We had distributors in other markets. But doing business in 25 markets, we were probably doing about maybe 15 to 18 million bucks. And then what we decided to do was go in just to take back some of the control and, take a focused approach at some key markets. So instead of trying to do 25, what can we go and do and really tell a clear story short term? So we focused on about 5 different markets between, I think it was like the UK, France, Germany, Spain, I think it was the Netherlands because we were based there, and really just focus on what we were doing, core story, core categories, core products. So we kind of really pulled things back and just were very focused on what message we wanted to say, because our brand awareness was like less than 5%, so what we in Europe. Yeah. So how do we go and tell a better story? We focused on the consumer. So we went back, and instead of trying to be, focused on this, this football or global football or soccer athlete, which, competing against, so many other big brands, we said, well, let's lend to what one of our core competencies was training. So kind of off the pitch or off the field. And, so we started looking at that, and we catered our assortments to that and some of our distribution plans around that. And we went into these 5 markets and started to tell that story. But again, where it was eye-opening to me, I'd never been there before. So I didn't, we're trying to focus on the consumer. I didn't really know the consumer. I didn't know the retail landscape as well as maybe some other people did. So first thing I did, but I knew the brand. I knew Under Armour. I knew where we came from. And we had this kind of, we'd done it before, this kind of hub and spoke type model where when the business started in the US, it was based around football. That was the core consumer, tight t-shirts on these football players. But then we started doing business. It was our kind of hub. And then the spokes were, we got into lacrosse, we got into baseball, we got into, maybe some soccer, hockey in that early days. When we went over early days and did the business in Japan, we took that exact same model. We still did, some American football business in Japan. We did some volleyball, but it was around baseball, and some of the professional baseball players that we partnered with, professional teams there. When we came to Canada, same model, but we put hockey in the hub, and we really told the same story. So we could take the same creative, the same brand message, brand ethos, taglines, everything, but just cater it to a different consumer. So when we went over to Europe, we did it, within training. So I knew that aspect of the brand and how to position the brand. But the first thing I did was hire an HR person in order that we could go and get the right people from a sales perspective to help map the marketplace, make sure we were doing things the right way, get a good marketer in place so we could tell stories the right way, and really focus our storytelling and our distribution on that consumer we wanted to target. So it forced me, I had no other choice but to empower these other people around me, on the team to do the things. So we would align on what the strategy was and what we needed to do. And then, it was a case of just shared responsibility and shared accountability to make sure we were doing things. So I very quickly, I don't think it, not that it didn't exist with me before, but I realized how important certain things like trust, transparency, and empowerment, fed the right leadership style, and, just really making sure that everybody felt a part of the business. They knew where it was they were going, or we were going. They knew what part they played in order to get us there. And that helped frame up what the culture was, over there.
So you said trust, transparency,
and empowerment.
So a couple of things that I heard there, that I just want to come back and touch on, as I write down these 3 that you just wrote there. But so you talked about brand story, and as you were saying, the question that popped into my head as you were talking was, how often does a guy like you go around and see a business where they're doing 2 to 5 million in revenue or whatever? It doesn't even matter what the revenue is, and you look at it and you go, I don't understand their story. How important is that? And I know it's difficult to prioritize, but if you had to prioritize, it's like you talked a lot about, hey, first thing you went over there was you hired an HR person that, bring in the right sales team, bring in the right people, create the right plan, create the right story. And so I'm curious if you were to kind of put a priority message on these for, the entrepreneur out there that's working to build their business, or whether they're, truthfully, I think a lot of this time, if you're a corporate employee, and I kind of picked up on this earlier when you were talking, it's like you were the guy who asked all the questions. And then when you ask all the questions, people go, I don't know, why don't you go figure it out? And that was kind of your brand story. Your brand story was, hey, I'm the guy that goes in. I'm just an inquisitive guy, and I ask a lot of questions, and they're like, I don't know, those are damn good questions. Can you get the answers? Yeah. Sure. Okay. And so so you can even, this is not just about entrepreneurs, is my point to this, is that if you're listening, for the listeners that are listening to this and they work inside a company, it's like, you need your own brand story, right? As an individual inside a company to make yourself recognizable and to pile up your plate and give you, things to accomplish and goals to achieve and whatnot. And so,
yeah. And I think within that focus, there's 3 things that, again, I've kind of got like a few, like, I don't want to call them like isms, but just things that I've kind of framed my thought process or my style around. And that, one was just from a leadership perspective, I mentioned around trust, transparency, and empowerment. But as far as when I think about that focus, I look at that and I think, for me, it comes down to leadership, comes down to continuity and about playing to your strengths and, get into maybe some of the stuff that I'm doing now. So I'd left Under Armour a few years ago. And since then, I've started, again, kind of continuing my sporting type story. I'm now a coach. So I coach various CEOs and their businesses on their strategy and, driving to the outcomes that they want to achieve. So making sure that, they're living the life that they want to live. But a lot of times, there's different approaches to take with each of these CEOs, based on, their personality, their style, the industry that they're in, the size of their business, what is the outcome that they're trying to drive to get to. So, within that, it's, what is their leadership style? How does that apply? Are they hands-on? Or are they going to take a step back? What does the team look like that they need to surround themselves with? So when it comes down to whether it's leadership or playing to their strengths, not everybody has the same strength. So, when you talk about building a team is made up of a group of role players. You got to make sure you have a complementary group there. So if your strength is something, bring in somebody else that can complement you. If your right hand has the same skills that you do, well, you're kind of duplicative. Let's get somebody else that can complement each other so that you're kind of going forward. So those things with like leadership, continuity, and playing to strengths, I think is a big thing for me. The continuity side is comes back to the planning stuff that we talked about, doing the things that you said you were going to do. Staying on a continuous path, towards where we want to go to, and, building out that plan. If we can identify what success looks like, then we can identify, what are the specific and measurable things that we need to do to get to that point. Then you're pretty far down the path of that playbook to say, okay, well, we know where we want to go. We know what success is going to look like on a monthly, quarterly basis. Well, okay, now let's get the team in place. We've got the scoreboard that we can measure ourselves against. And, as long as you have the right people there. And that's where it goes back to, whether it's like the Jim Collins thing about, getting the right people on the bus and in the right seats and, making sure that they are complementary to what it is that you bring to the table. So, it all goes back to just, I think leadership, is paramount, but just figuring out what your style is. And then I would say, take it into the things you were talking about, storytelling. For me, working within, kind of consumer products and, within Under Armour, and probably scales across different industries, but is understanding the consumer. That was something that, I was, and I'm still very focused on with a lot of clients I work with, is just making sure that we've identified and understand who our consumer is and putting them, at the center of decision-making so that, I may be running a business and I may think I know what the best thing is to go forward, but let me have the consumer validate that and tell me, because if I'm trying to communicate to them, if I'm trying to tell a story to them, I want to make sure that it's going to resonate. I need to know what it is that's going to get them excited. What's going to feed their purchase intent? What's going to drive their, interest?
That's a brilliant point. Okay. Dude, I've written more notes here. Like, it's insane. So this is awesome. Thank you for all of that. I have a couple of questions. First, on the leadership. How often do you, because I think, for me, awareness, when I was younger, my awareness was not as good as I thought it was. I think it's better now, but I could still be in the same place. When I look at myself in 20 years, I'll be, even when I was 50, it wasn't as good as I thought it was. You know what I mean? It's not getting that proportionally better, but I think it is. But how often do you, when you're working with leaders, whether it was at Under Armour or today now as a success coach, how often do you find that leaders really don't fully understand what their style is, what their direction is, and what's your advice to them, and how do you pull that out? So if somebody's listening, like, how do they go, yeah, you know what, I didn't know I was that way, or I'm not sure how I am, and what would that look like? And
yeah, I think the big thing that you just mentioned from listening is, somebody that can listen, whether you are self-aware or not, whether you're, but just being able to listen to what the consumer is saying, listen to what your team is saying, the people around you are saying, listen to what the metrics that you're measuring are saying and to what it is you should do. So it's just, I think listening is key to it, but, I don't know. It's a good question. I think self-awareness is paramount from a leadership standpoint, just to understand, again, what your skills are. If you're going to play to your strengths, understanding what your strengths are. and those things can evolve. I think, a key part of any leader is just continuing to learn. So really understanding yourself and where the opportunity to learn is, I think is key. But I think, I think maybe some people are more self-aware than others. I think those that get through the business, they continue to learn. If they're applying that learning mindset into it, the awareness continues to grow as their business grows. I think, but I think that's the biggest opportunity. And I don't know actually how much you can grow the self-awareness, or if it's something that is somewhat innate. I think because of sports, because of just business opportunity, I think I'm a fairly self-aware business person, probably more so than I am on the personal side, just because I've, probably put so much focus into the business side. And, I've had, great, wife and family around me to kind of support me on things. I've finally put my focus on that. And, I think I've become more maybe self-aware of learn a lot more learning in the past few years since leaving Under Armour, since slowing down a little bit. But I think self-awareness is key.
Do you ever come across, leaders that have either worked for you, that you're working with now, and go, okay, this guy or girl doesn't have any idea of where they really are on the spectrum? And if so, what do you implement 360 reviews just to kind of give them a little bit of insight of what their team actually says? Like, hey, I think I'm here. And the team's like, oh no, you're way over here.
Yeah, no, I think that's, just from asking questions. I think 360s is great. So they can kind of get, the, collective feedback on things, a lot of times, but just asking questions and, just getting them to kind of turn things around and looking internally. And, they start to ask themselves a little bit questions and, just, Simon Sinek, we start with why, and really just kind of going in, well, why is that? Why is that? And you continue to dig deeper. I think it really unpacks a lot of good stuff, just by asking questions.
And then the second thing that you said earlier was the team that you need. And I think that's really, really important. Like, I have made that mistake so many times, especially when I was younger, where I'm looking at, like, when I was younger, I wanted to work with people that were like me because it was more enjoyable. And it was like, it just was a bit of an easier game, right? Like, if I'm passing the puck to somebody, I know that guy because or a girl. I see them in the mirror every time. Like, it's there's a lot of similarities there, and they're sometimes easier to play with. They're easier to work with. They're easier to kind of, because when you're brainstorming, it's like, okay, yeah, this is great, and you feel like you're getting into a collective, but it's really not, because you don't get that outside perspective. And so, I think it's super huge. I'd love to hear anything that you have to say about, not only just the importance, because you did emphasize the importance, but what would be the keys to, if you had 5 players that you needed on the team, or 5 different personalities in a play or in the business, what would they look like? What would you be looking for?
I'm trying to think of the right words. Maybe balance is something, or complementary. Looking at that, do a lot of things with clients in that now, where, we'll use certain modules or tests to kind of get an understanding of what, people's styles are. So whether that's using something like a disc analysis, or, personality type, analysis, to really understand, key motivators and why people do what they do, how they do what they do. Use that a lot now, just to understand, is someone, have a more dominant or type A personality, they're just driving for results. They're very fast paced. They're going to be very decisive, which is great. But you also know that if they're moving fast, very decisive, they're probably going to be moving at a quick pace and leaving a bit of a wake behind them. So if you surround them with people that are lower on that scale, those people will likely drown, so making sure that you have people that can keep up with what that leader in that is doing, but also somebody that's complementary. Typically, those types of leaders want to move fast. They're a little less structured. They're a little bit more outside the box thinkers. So complementing them with typically someone operational or financially minded that's more structured and analytical in the way they think. So you got a bit of balance and stuff there. But I think that's just, maybe some examples of just, having balance on a team. The example you use, if you want to get somebody out there, if you got 2 right wingers out there, you're both going to be stuck in the same area of the ice. Whereas if you get more, a balance and, get someone a good, centerman, or, balance of players in there, then you can cover a little bit more ground and, be a little bit more complementary to each other. And just the same thing with, I think styles of whether it's communication. Some people are more people oriented. Some people are more task oriented. Some people are fast paced versus slow paced. So just really getting a good balance of people on the team. I'd look back at, the times through Under Armour, there were times when we brought in, some super smart people, like, very good resume, great background, a lot of whether it's brand or, competitor type experience. And they'd come in with a wealth of knowledge, but a lot of them never lasted very long because they come in, they couldn't operate on an emotional level, with what was going on within the team, within the brand, within the business, the pace in which, the team operated, just the passion in which it operated. It's just, there was a lot more than just an intelligence side and a skill side. There was an emotional side that you needed to, emotional IQ that you needed to be able to balance in as well. And I think that applies to any business, especially based on how the leader operates and what they expect, from the balance of the team.
I'm glad you tapped on that because it was going to be my next question, which was, what do you think is the most important thing in assembling a team? What would be the one thing where you go, if you're built, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a company, you've done this. I mean, you've replicated this thing, 4 times now? You did the Americas, you did Canada, you did Europe, you came back, took over North America. What's the one thing that if you were trying to rally the troops, because you've got all these different, you talked about earlier about offense, defense, the scoreboard, like the analytics and the finance area and all those things. But what's the one thing that keeps the whole team hinged together?
I'd probably say structure. To me, I would say, to me, structure determines function. So getting the right structure in place is what's going to allow the business, the strategy to be executed, I guess, is, and when I say structure, talk about people, talk about process, getting the right people in place, again, getting that complementary team in place. So you've got the right people on the bus, everybody's in the right seats, working around this concept of trust, transparency, and empowerment. Everybody knows what the plan is, where it is that we're going, what role they play in getting us there. So there's a people side to it. The other thing I think about on the people side was, I never consider myself great at interviewing. I'd sit there, you'd look at the resume, and I never really went down and said, like, okay, well, let me look at what their job was. What role did they hold at, say, prior company? What are the metrics that they're listing that they did? They drove business from X to Y. They drove, profitability from here to here. Like, I never really looked at that. I never looked at where they went to school. I never looked at what their degree was in or where it was from. It was more this. I just wanted to have a conversation. I want to understand who the person was. So if I take that back to sports, I want to understand how good of an athlete that they were. When it came to Under Armour, whether it was, depending on the role, it would vary, but we could teach them how to sell, how to market t-shirts and shoes. I wanted to know what the competence was, what type of person are we getting, that can plug into things here. When you get a great athlete, typically they can pick up and do multiple different things, different sports, if they're athletic enough. So getting a good, athlete from a business perspective, and then we could kind of train them accordingly, and building a team of great athletes, and then, we could kind of take things somewhere. But depending on how the specific skill set, sometimes you needed great designers or product developers, or you need someone with a background in, retail, something like that. So, but really getting somebody that, had a good baseline corporate athleticism that you could kind of build around. So that would be on the people side. And then on the process side of structure was just getting repeatable things that we could do in order to drive the outcomes that we were wanting to get to. So if we knew we wanted to double the business, in 12 months, okay, well, what are the things it's going to take to get that? What do we need to do from a product perspective, from a pricing perspective? What does our distribution look like? We figure out what that plan looks like. How are we going to measure those success points on a monthly and quarterly basis? Then we have an operating rhythm. What are we doing on a daily basis? What are we doing weekly? Who's meeting with who? How often is your leadership meeting? How often is your finance meeting? What are you doing from an operations and planning perspective? And then once you got those things in place, you connected all of those meetings, then you'd have a real operating rhythm. If you did great every day, you could win the week. If you had 4 great weeks, you'd win the month. If you had 3 great months, you win the quarter. If you get 4 great quarters, you win the year. So kind of just taking everything down to the sum of its parts and just making sure that we are doing all the right things connected to each other, so that all the people and process were aligned and connected with each other. So.
Yeah. And so, this is an area where I'm a real big fan of, is like the analytics, analyzing where are we? Many business people don't even know if they're winning the game or not winning the game. They look at a P&L at the end of the year. And I've said this before on the podcast, if they did well, they have one drink. If they did shitty, they have two drinks. You know what I mean? But I'm curious, like, how did analytics play a role with, say, Under Armour, or with some of your clients now, where you're kind of like, hey, we need to know how we're performing, and how much does that play into the transparency piece against cross-functional teams? Because for me, I've found that has been, the bigger your business grows, the more difficult it is to keep transparency, keep cross-functional teams working together. And then if they start to break down, and I've been a victim of this, I've had these problems before, I've had to sort them out, and it's awful. Once that stuff breaks down, trust starts to delineate quickly, and now you're in trouble.
No, I think I'll go back to the kind of the interviewing thing. So one of the big questions that I usually like to ask in an interview is on a scale of 1 to 10, how competitive are you? And it's interesting, some of the, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, but you get an understanding as to, okay, well, you think you're an 8. Okay, well, just explain that to me. Give me some examples. And because I consider myself, I'm competitive in pretty much every aspect of my life. I think we talked about this, except for golf. For some reason, I really couldn't care. Golf is just more about, you and I being out there having a good time and enjoying the day up at top of it. But,
yeah. I suck. That's why I suck so bad. That's why I'm not competitive in it.
Yeah, a good score is a bonus, but other than that, it's I'm not as competitive there for some reason. But everything else is there's a level of competitiveness, a want to win, and I think looking at that, in order to win, you need to have a plan. You need to have a means of what it is. Well, what does winning look like? How are we going to get there? But then putting a plan in place in order to figure out, what that's going to look like. And I think that is key. And then just having that will, a collective will from everybody there to know where it is you're going in order to drive that success. But getting data and analytics and to know you're going to win. Like the cool thing about sports is, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. So, there's a scoreboard aspect that's going to tell you whether or not you're doing well or not. And you can still be having fun, but if the scoreboard says, you got more points on the board, then you're going to win. So having a scoreboard in business, I think is so key. At least for me, is to know whether we're winning, but you can't just wait until the end of the game and be like, well, did we win? Like you're keeping track, whether it's, every period of the game, every quarter of the game, every half of the game, whatever it is, you're keeping score throughout that. And based on what the scoreboard says, you need to potentially change your plan in order to adapt to what's going on within the game at any given time. So looking at business the same way, having a scoreboard or a forecast as to what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to run the plays, what plays you're going to run when in order to complete that forecast to get to where you want to be. Keeping score throughout that, using data, using analytics is something that I think has become more and more imperative over the years, but it's table stakes, to be able to know what you're doing. And if you're doing the things that you said you were going to do, it's understanding who your consumer is, understanding the marketplace. I think it's, we used to say, at Under, it became the new oil. Like mining that data would give you information about your consumer, about your business, about your competitors that would allow you to make decisions going forward. So I think the data and the analytics is key. I remember back one of the first, we'd done this in Canada. We'd had, retail partners and, we're managing what it is and monitoring what they're selling and monitoring their sell through on a weekly basis, seeing, okay, well, we just launched a new shoe. How did it sell last week? How many units did they sell? How many units do they have in inventory? So we could judge whether they were in a good inventory position, not a good inventory position. What did we have? Could we replenish that to kind of maintain the sales trend that was there? And it's a real art and science to doing that. And, one of the people that we hired was hired this woman to be basically a sales planner. So she came in and she would mine all that data and track weekly sell through as to what it was that we were doing within certain partners of ours, retail partners. And it got to a point that we knew so much that was going on within the business. And we had one brand, we had ourselves. That's who we were monitoring. We were watching what was going on with competitors, but we could really see a lot of detail as to what we were doing. When we talked to our retail partners, they had 200, 300, 400 different vendors that they were trying to manage to make sure that their business and their shelves were stocked with the right stuff. So we would take all that data and analytics and we would go to them and say, here's what your business did last week. Here's where you did well. Here's where you didn't do so well. Here's where you should be bringing in more product because you only have 2 weeks of inventory left, 3 weeks of inventory. So if you bring this in, you're not going to miss sales. Here's what you should be discounting in order to get rid of this and make room for this new stuff to come in. And when we started doing that, they looked at that and they were basically like, can you give us more of this? Can you provide more insights? So in a lot of ways, we took the pen out of the buyer's hand and we started writing our own POs and they would just kind of sign off on them. And that using data is what gave us a whole new insight to go and take market share based on just controlling our own business and making sure that we were in stock 100% of the time. And, they were making high margin dollar, high margin percentage on our products. And they were thanking us for making sure that we were coming with all this data. So go over to Europe, HR person, we hire sales, we hire marketing. I actually brought that same girl that we hired in Canada over to Europe to kick off the same concept within the European business.
That's genius.
And just set it up. So data, I think to your point that's what gives you all the information. It's what allows you to make decisions.
But then I think too, like, as you were telling that story, I thought, wow, how much value are you providing your customer who's, let's say, the sports check, the Forensi group, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the
Forensi group.
Forensi. And how much value are you providing them? You're no longer just a t-shirt, shoe, track pant, whatever you're selling. If you move from commodity into value proposition type of position where you're giving them so much detail that you're basically giving them the dials in the cockpit to fly their machine.
And it was important to them because over time we became, I think as we continued to do that, we continued to call it share within the categories that we played in, but we became the number one vendor, across, a lot of our biggest customers. So we were the number one vendor that they would deal with. So it was meaningful to them that they did well in their business with us, that they didn't that they were in stock with the stuff that was selling, that the stuff that wasn't selling, that they were moving it out, making room for new stuff, and just, how they were turning their inventory, what margins they were making. So we were helping them manage that. So for one of their largest, vendors, that was quite impactful to their business. So it was, again, we used to say it a lot, was just, establishing big bets with big partners. And that's part of what we did within partnership, was we made it a true partnership that we wanted to make sure that, we were both winning in the situation.
And were your competitors doing that stuff? Like, was that, one of your major competitors had to be Nike. Is that the biggest one?
Yeah. That would have been the biggest. I kind of think they were doing the same thing. I don't know if they were doing it at the same level of detail, but like we were literally going and hiring buyers and bringing them over on the other side of the table so that they knew what they would want to see as a buyer. And we were just putting them in more of an analyst position to go and speak to their counterparts as buyers and say, hey, here's what you're missing. And again, whether our competitors were doing that to that degree or not, I think just monitoring sell-through is just part of running a retail business. But it paid off well for us, just mining that data and using it to make decisions.
So sorry, what I heard was you'd bring buyers in on your side.
So when we would go and hire, we'd go in and recruit to bring in somebody in, say, a planning position in order that we can kind of forecast our inventory requirements, our buys, what type of inventory we're going to need to analyze what our retail partners were doing. When we would go to recruit that for that analyst type position, we would go in and look for people that had been buyers at, the Bay or department stores, whatever, department stores,
National
other
Sports,
retailers,
whatever,
Sport Check, National Sports, Dick's Sporting Goods, Macy's, wherever it would be, somebody that has experience buying because they're used to, creating assortments. They're used to being held to certain inventory turns and margin metrics and, et cetera. So they understand what the metrics are to winning in that buyer's chair. So we bring them in as an analyst, and then they're basically giving us all the information so that we can communicate with that buyer and show the buyer the metrics that we know what they're looking for. So we just go down that path.
Yeah. And I think that, it's a great strategy, right? And I think it's a strategy that sometimes gets lost, especially on smaller businesses where they're not, they're thinking they've got to sell into the customer rather than, hey, how do I go find a customer, hire him? Now he has all the keys to every lock, every combination. He'll be able to tell you, and you can learn off of them in how to get to your customer in a better, more efficient, more effective way.
Yeah. And to tie it back to what we were talking about before, all of these metrics or insights that it comes back to consumer behavior. So again, you're reading what the consumer is doing in order to then make decisions with your retail partner as to what needs to get done. So again, just kind of taking that back to working with understanding who your consumer is and then making your decisions based on, putting the consumer at the center of those decisions, whether it's a retail business or otherwise, just, letting the consumer tell you what it is that they want.
Yeah, those are big points for, people me and for our listeners to take on, because, you don't typically, sit down and spend enough time thinking about that kind of strategy. So often we as business people keep doing the things we've always been doing, and maybe we change 1 or 2 degrees, but we don't really look at saying, how do we flip the whole page and really look at it from a different perspective. And so I encourage like the listeners who are listening to the stories and what you're telling them is to really kind of flip the page on your businesses and how can you implement some of these things that you're recommending, because it can be it'll be game changer. It will be game changer. I mean, you built a $0 to $400 million business in Canada with Under Armour and ran a $3.5 billion business. So
yeah. And I guess it depends over time too. Things are going to change. Like I know when, from the time that I started earlier days in Under Armour to, later on in my career, I maybe started as the consumer, but I definitely was not as much of the consumer once I left. I in a sense aged out of that, of that demographic. And then same thing example when I went over to Europe, like I wasn't necessarily that same, consumer as what was over there. So again, I had to learn more. I had to better understand what the consumer needed over time, because that changed. I didn't have as close a connection to that as maybe I did in the early days. So, but same thing for others running a business is just understanding who your consumer is and making sure that, they're helping you make decisions as to how to tell stories against, to them, how to bring them to your website, how to drive traffic, what's going to want them, desire to convert on the website and stuff like that, based on, what their requests are, what they require.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when you were talking earlier and just now, when you're talking now, and I'm drawing back on what you were talking about earlier, playing lacrosse and being in proximity to the athletes that you were selling into, it reminded me, we had a buddy of mine, Mark Bradley, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago. And one of the things he was saying, he's got a fairly large software business, but he says he spends 100 days a year with his customers. 100 days a year. I was staggered by that. That's a big number. Like for a CEO to be spending 100 days in the field with customers, it's a huge commitment, but he's building purposeful product to his customers, and that's how they do it.
And I imagine there's specific customers that he's spending his time with. So, his key the key relationships with his key customers, I assume, is where he's spending his time. And I think that's part of the responsibility of the CEO, whether it's having a vision, establish that vision, making sure that you have enough cash to do the things that you need to do, managing those key relationships. We talked about continuous learning, making sure that all these things, I think those are, a few of the key responsibilities of a CEO, of a leader, in order to continue to grow and keep things going forward. Get the other people around you to kind of take on some of that other stuff and stay close to them. But again, vision, cash, relationships, learning, I think are key components.
Did you ever have trouble, pulling yourself out of the minutia of, some of the work on a day-to-day basis, where you're just, as the business starts to grow, you used to do this and you used to be involved in that. And now you're like, oh shit, I don't have any time, but and is that ever an issue for you? Or?
I think so. I think, to a degree, yes. And I think that's where, again, when I described that the transition from Europe, I was kind of forced to take a step back. Like I like being hands-on, like in playing lacrosse, like when stuff was on the line, when something needed to happen, like I didn't want to be sitting on the bench. Like I wanted to be on the field. I wanted to be on the floor, ideally with the ball on my stick, so you could influence the outcome. And I think that carried into business as well. Like when stuff was going on, I wanted to be in the meeting. I wanted to have a say as to what it was that we were doing. I wanted to actually be involved with it. And I think over time, again, when I first came up and set up the business in Canada, it was me. And so I had to go and get the order. I had to actually enter the order. I had to go and make sure the order shipped. And then I had to follow up to make sure that, okay, well, when do we got to replenish that order? And then eventually you get salespeople and customer service and marketing people, and you get other kind of people so that you get into the process and stuff of doing all those things. But I think I did always maintain a connection to it. And I wanted to be involved to know what was going on. And I was able to, again, I don't think micromanage, but still stay involved and drive the accountability. The Europe thing was the real trigger to saying like, well, wait a minute, I need to stay involved, but the leadership is where I can apply a lot more value in driving leadership. And again, through that, establishing trust around the team, making sure the culture was set up the right way, having transparency so that everybody knew what we were doing, why we were doing it. It wasn't just like, I guess this is what we have to do. They knew they were doing a certain task to get us to a certain outcome at the end of the month, the quarter of the year. And I think that just helps, that's the type of stuff I think that builds culture. I think it's great having happy hours, and it's great, spending time together as a team and doing offsites and stuff like that, but making sure that everybody has an understanding as to what the business is trying to do and what role everybody plays in it. I think that just makes it fun. And that's what I loved about getting up. Like I loved getting up and going to work every day, at Under Armour. And it was something that, I found that was my goal, is I wanted everybody else to feel the same way. Everybody's got to get up and go to work. Why not love what you do?
Well, that, and, I think, one of the easiest ways to build a culture is to win. Mm-hmm. Everybody loves to win. And so when you're on a winning team and, it is, the wind is at your back and you're just kind of going with it. It is a spectacular way to be able to create a culture. So if you can position your company, your people to win and feel like they're winning every day, and certainly, you're not going to feel every moment of every day, and not every day, but they got to be walking out winning, 80% of the time. And it's true. Winners want the ball. Winners want, you saw that at the Super Bowl with Travis Kelce, right? It's like, he's losing his mind on Big Red. It's like, get me in the fucking game, man.
Exactly.
and that's what I like to see, is like,
and a lot of that is, and I'm, this applies to me, but just, I think a lot of people can find a way. They can will things to happen. And, it's not just, it isn't necessarily just manifested. It, it takes a plan and, a strategy to execute against, but, to find a way and to will something to happen is where you see the repeated things happen. And I think it became hard. I think Under Armour, there was a stat, I think, again, as a public company, I think we went, something like 26 quarters with 20+% growth, which is awesome. But man, it becomes hard to do, to continue to replicate that, those results quarter after quarter after quarter. And, but again, it's never going to happen without it. It's not just going to happen. It's never going to happen without a strategy, without a plan in order to get there. So, okay, well, what else can we do? Where's the untapped market? What can we do by growing geographically? What can we do by, getting into a different distribution plan? What can we do by getting into a different sales channel? What can we do with a new product? How do we do with different price points? Like identifying what the opportunities are, and then just, continue to find a way to grow.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned that record of whatever it was, 26 quarters with 20%. I had read that before. I
think it was 26, but it was
whatever.
It was,
yeah. It's a lot. That's a lot of quarters, man. Like you're talking 6 years of 20% growth every 3 months. I'm curious. I have a question about that, and that many people might think, well, when you're public and you've got money and you've got a brand and you're growing a brand, it's like 20% a month. Like, yeah, I guess I could see how that happens, whatever. But how hard was it? Let's say you do it. I'll just, for lack of better conversation, but you go 10 or 15 or even 20 quarters, but those last, 10 or whatever percent, 20% of those quarters, they must have been a fucking grind. And it must have taken like a lot of effort and pressure or no?
Effort. Yeah. It wasn't about pressure. It was, everybody, we sat down at the start of things and we would, put a plan together as to what it was that we were, what it was we were going to drive. And then we just went and executed the play and ran the plays to get there. But, there was always, it took a lot of effort, but there was always openings there to do stuff, because you look at, we started out as an apparel brand. So we were largely apparel. So there was huge footwear opportunity. We were largely US based. So there was big international opportunity. We were largely a men's based business to start. Then we scaled into women's. It was largely wholesale distribution. Then we scaled into online, into direct to consumer. So opening up our own stores. So there was always ways that we had identified. It was just about executing. It wasn't like, oh shit, how are we going to do this? There was always a plan and a means to do it. It was just like, man, we just got to go and run the right plays in order to get there. And like any sport, any business, plays don't always get run exactly as needed. You can't predict what's going to sell and not sell. But if it didn't sell, we typically have another product launching that we could kind of chase it, the next month or the next quarter. And it was always something that, we had going. So it was about just, again, goes back to having a plan, fail to plan to fail. So get the right plan in place and execute the play.
Yeah. And I don't know if the listeners heard that fully, but what I heard was, when you were talking about Under Armour, it was like, know where you are and know where the opportunities are and move towards them and create a plan. Like when you really laid that out, and I'm listening to you going, yeah, like, for those of you who have your own businesses, it's like, if you're selling into one pipeline, what's a pipeline that is that, a product that would be complementary to, you could start selling to grow your business, to drive another 50% growth, that your current customers could utilize that and you could implement it into your business. And then where else could you do it geographically? Could you expand a territory to drive more revenue, drive more growth? I think there's a big trap that people can fall into, where, you've had some success, you've, done well, and you expect that you're going to do the same over and over and over again. And, if you're not innovating, you're dying.
Exactly. You're not innovating, you're dying. You're not growing, you're dying. So, you can't stand still. You always got to know what, the next, what the next step is, and always just, always think ahead. Again, it comes down to having that plan as to where it is, revisiting that plan on a monthly, on a quarterly basis. I think you mentioned this earlier, like it's crazy to me how many businesses have some relative success with zero plan. And it's just, they're going down a path and it's working for them. Be like, man, imagine how well that could do if you guys, if you had something prescriptive in place 100%. That could take you somewhere.
Right. I know, it's crazy. You talk, I mean, I get an opportunity to talk to a lot of small business people, over the last 15 years, and you're just like, holy fuck, you're doing this good. And you just wake up in the morning and you guys start working. Like it's insane.
Yeah, no. And that happens. And it's probably what I enjoy the most about working with clients as a coach is working with them to understand, okay, well, what does the plan entail right now? What does success look like, 12 months from now? Okay, great. Well, what needs to happen between now and then for us to get there? So let's not just wait and see what the outcome is. Let's actually influence what that outcome looks like, but have a plan. We can take some time, put the right plan in place, understand what our history looks like. What types of things can we implement? Okay, great. How are we doing from a sales perspective? How are we doing from a marketing perspective? What do our people look like in those areas? How much are we spending against those types of things? Really just kind of taking it down and vetting it. And then to me, strategy is nothing more than making decisions, put in place, a strategy as to what decisions we need to make when, and start moving forward. And again, put that scoreboard up in front of you every month and every quarter to know we're on track to the outcome we decided against.
So just out of curiosity, what do you just mentioned your clients that you work with, what size businesses do you work with traditionally? Like where's your sweet spot, or do you care?
I don't care. I don't have anything like Under Armour size. I've had a couple clients, that were, over $1 billion to, $500 million, $1 billion. Right now it's probably, I've got anywhere between 5 million and 100 million in revenues across a number of different industries. So it's not all t-shirts and shoe companies that I'm working with. It's stuff that's, whether it's, I've got businesses within the robotics industry. I've got others within, resellers that work on Amazon. I have another footwear business to, construction companies. So a variety of different things, but again, a lot of it, the conversations comes down to a lot of the stuff that we've talked about: people, process, those things apply cross industry, making sure, like, some of them have higher margins than others. Some of them have different, focus areas as far as how they're going to create leads with consumers and create that lead funnel. But people and process, it's making sure you got the right things in place, to keep score with yourself and the team.
I can imagine you're an awesome fucking coach, dude. Honestly, like, you're such a great guy, and I don't want to say you're mellow or chill, because there's this intensity level underneath you, obviously, from, because you're a competitive guy, but you're really, easy to talk to, and I could see strategizing with you would be obviously beneficial, but it would be a real treat, and somebody would learn. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily plugging you, but if anybody is, and looking for a coach, and we're not ending the podcast, but at the end we'll get you to, reach out, people who want to reach out to you or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, like I am an operator. I just think as far as how I think about stuff. And I think that lends well to the coaching side of things, to be able to plug in, not with just a CEO, but with areas within their team that they maybe need some help, whether it's on the sales side, the operational side, financial, marketing. I can plug into certain things and find out where there's a disconnect, where there's a gap, and how we need to fix it. Yeah, I think I'm a pretty laid back, mellow guy. I was always more of a lead by example guy in sports. I was never the kind of the loudest leader in the room, but there was never a lack of effort or working hard, or, I was always putting out whatever 100% because of that competitive nature. So there is this deep down thing of just wanting to win. I think that does get the best of me in that at times, but it's been interesting shifting from running a business to coaching a business. And originally it was like, wow, this is a lot different. And I think over time I figured out, well, it's not really that different. I can still take my same leadership style and apply it as a coach, because a coach can still provide, can still ask questions, but there is a level of instruction that comes from coaching as well. So I do need to kind of plug in and meet my customer or my client where they are, as far as what it is that they're dealing with. What's the problem that they have? Okay, well, how do we deal with that? How would I deal with that as a leader? Let me take my coaching hat off and put my CEO hat on. What would I do? And then kind of partnering with them as to how we figure out what the next steps are. So it's definitely taken a little bit of learning to kind of get into the call it coaching chair. But I look at it the same way I would as if I was running the business, to make the right decisions around people, process, and get the right plan in place.
Yeah. Do you, and it's, like I said, I think you'd be awesome at it. How many years have you been doing that now? Like, how long have you been out of Under Armour? 3 years. What do you find are the common missteps, mistakes, confusions on the part of business owners or CEOs? What would be the common ones? Just to give the listener a perspective of, hey, if they want to do some thinking about their business or their opportunities, these might be some areas.
First one, we've talked about is just the lack of planning or strategy or vision to what success looks like. That would be one. Having really a detailed plan in place that they and their teams are executing against. That would be one. Second one, I'd say maybe, working too much in the business as opposed to on the business. And listen, some startup aspects of things, that's just part of it. You got to be in there and you got to be working on it, but understanding, where you want to get to and how you get to a point of working on the business versus in the business. We talked about people. I think I see a lot where, we'll go around and ask and be like, okay, well, what's the biggest pain point you're dealing with? It's, well, operationally we're dealing with X, Y, and Z, and this isn't working. And I say, okay, well, tell me about, who runs the operational side of things. It's, oh, well, that's Steve. Okay. Scale of 1 to 10. How's Steve doing? Oh, Steve's about a 6. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, how long has Steve been a 6? Well, he's been a 6 for quite a while. He's like, well, what's it going to take for Steve to be a 10? And then I typically will start coaching Steve on the operational side or whatever it is then, and understand if this is something that we can close that gap to get us to where we want to be, or is it something that, we got to make a change. And so going back, that's probably another thing is, I see is people leaving people on their teams too long when it's just not a right fit. It's not working and they just hold on to it. And again, I think I'm a very loyal person, and I probably did that a lot in my career, but keep them on the team, got to figure out how to close that gap and advance them. And eventually, if it's not going to work, then, decide what change you're going to make to move things forward.
I agree with you. I think that is, I've made that mistake and it's tough. It's because you're making decisions based on people's lives, their mortgage, their this, that, whatnot, but they also have to show up. Or I always say, to our team, it's like, many of the time it's my mistake in not having clarity in what I'm actually looking for when I'm looking to bring somebody into a position. And the miss is not necessarily them. It's me not really kind of knowing exactly what I was looking for.
And that some of that often can tie back to a plan, right? If you don't have the right level of detail within your vision or plan as to what you want to do, part of that plan should be some kind of blueprint or org of the future going to look like, so that, okay, well, we're going to go and hire some people today, but what's going to happen 6 months, 12 months from now? What is that department or division going to look like now? Is this person going to be the leader of that department we bring in today? Or are we going to hire somebody in above this person? So again, just always having that thought ahead as to what that's going to look like, so that we're kind of building something. It's not just for today. It's going to be for the future as well.
Right. That's good advice. Talk about future. And one of the questions that actually was popping into my head earlier was, if you're giving advice to university students, we actually have a fairly good following of university students that are following the podcast. But if you were to give them advice, what would you recommend in regards to, not necessarily like a industry, because I mean, I think many industries are going to get turned upside down, whether it's how they market, how they deliver, and get their product to the consumer. Technology is obviously going to be a massive factor in the next, kind of 10 to 20 years. But what kind of advice would you give to somebody that's kind of coming out, whether it's somebody with a psychology degree or a business degree or whatever, it doesn't matter, and they're looking to engage in a company?
I would say, again, going back to just my experience, was just being intellectually curious. Just don't go in there necessarily accepting or focusing on just kind of what's put right in front of you. See what there is around you. Whether you're going in as a junior level marketing person, as an admin person, to a, director level of something, like, what do you see as the opportunities as you get into the business? Where do you see the opportunities, and how can you expose yourself to learning? It's not about necessarily just getting into the next position, the next job. How do you expose yourself to learn? And then if you do that, the other things in that will likely follow. So just being intellectually curious, and, whether it's learning about the job that you're in, looking at other interests, other industries, understanding your competitors, just being intellectually curious. And then, the other thing that was told to me early on in my career that's always stuck with me is be patient, never panic. Don't worry about forcing things to happen. Just be patient. If you go about things the right way, if you are intellectually curious, you put your right foot forward in things. If you be a good teammate, typically good things are going to happen.
Yeah, that is good advice, man. I was never good at that when I was young.
Me neither.
I was horrible at it. And I just wonder sometimes if you have to, if you have to evolve through to that, or if life teaches you it, or if it's nature or nurture, but I'm not the most patient guy now either, but I am much more patient than I used to be, especially with my planning and my strategy.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I don't think I've ever been the most patient, personally or professionally, but I think like just the path that Under Armour took, it got big fast, and it was a fast paced environment. And it was interesting whenever people would come in, like that's one of the things that they noticed. They'd be like, wow, like what a great group of people, but man, this is a fast paced environment. Like it is fun, but it is moving quick. And that's part of what I liked about it, was just, okay, that's okay. That worked. What's next? Let's keep it going, keep moving. And, I think that maybe fed a little bit of impatience to kind of get things going. But I mentioned kind of doing these analysis before. So like if I look at myself, I was fairly high D in kind of a type A, despite being somewhat maybe introverted, very decisive, like to move fast, kind of keep things moving. But I'm very high on a compliance side. So very analytical. So I like structure. I like to move fast, but I'm going to pause every once in a while and check to be like, okay, yep, we're good. Okay, let's keep going. And then I'll pause and kind of check and make sure, okay, so we're good. So it's continue to move things forward, but check and validate, move, validate, kind of get things going that way. So I think I've learned to have a little bit of moments of patience in there, just to give myself the comfort level that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. I used to be a really, really high D. And now I'm a really, really high D.
Yeah. I was going to say, typically it does not change. Typically, since what you are when you're 14, 15 years old, you are carrying that through life.
Yeah, exactly. You actually talked about like a profile. You didn't use the word profile. I don't want to put a word in your mouth, but do you guys use you had mentioned DISC actually. Do you use one that you prefer, since we've been talking about it a little bit, for people that might be considering?
What I use, it's called a TTI profile. So it's a combination of it talks about DISC as far as what, why you do what you do. And then the motivators is kind of how you do what you do. And it goes through like 12 motivating factors as to, where you are on a scale from a motivation perspective. Like, is it power? Is it the environment in that you're in? Is it seeking knowledge? Is it, what are the things? So when I look at this based on proposed clients, I understand what motivates them. Do they want power? Do they want success? Are they continual learners? Are they outside the box thinkers? They typically just stick to traditional things that have worked for them in the past. So you just get a bit more understanding of things, but a lot of it is through this TTI profile, which is a combination of DISC and motivating.
So is the company called TTI? Like if I Google TTI, do you know?
If you Google TTI, it would come up. I don't recall
up.
the company in that provides it, but it's a standard like DISC profile.
Yeah. Okay. Cause we use the DISC profile in our company now, but
so it talks about dominance, talks about influence. So
conscientiousness, steadiness,
people, and then steadiness. So you got D is dominance, I is influence, S steadiness, and C is compliance.
And then, so that's the only one you use.
Yeah, we just use that, and then it has another kind of motivating factor in there that it's got this call it like spectrum that shows kind of motivating factors. I think there's 6 different motivating factors that you kind of see where they would fall in that, so you understand just why people would what motivates people to do what it is that they do.
Oh, I didn't know that. I don't think we've been using DISC for years, and I didn't know that.
Yeah, this may be a
TTI thing. So
this may be like an add-on to that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have my team look at that. Yeah. I don't. You know what? We talked about so much stuff. I want to make sure that we don't miss anything. But we talked a little bit about scoreboard, and I know we went back to it. But is there anything on scoreboard that you would kind of throw into people who are not necessarily using a scoreboard? What would be important? What are the factors? What should they be looking for? Who might they, connect with to help them with a scoreboard? Cause there's a lot of businesses out there not using scoreboards.
Yeah. I think it's making sure, first thing, making sure you're keeping score of the right things, and not making it too many things. And then, how much of that depends on, I guess, whether it's the consumer helping you understand what some of those metrics are. A lot of times it's financially, so you can look at the income statement, balance sheet as to kind of what you want to look at there. So in my past, it was talking about revenue, it was talking about margin, it was talking about profitability, it was talking about inventory, but what are the things in that are going to be most meaningful? So don't keep, good to keep score on as many things as you can, but only really focus on, what is most important. But also figuring out, well, what is it that you're trying to get to? What does success look like 12 months from now? What are we going to celebrate when we get to it? Okay, what are the metrics that are going to impact that the most? And let's make sure that those are the ones that we are keeping track of. A lot of times, if you can identify, say, those 5, those are going to cascade down into maybe some other metrics that will feed the other ones. So then that scoreboard kind of cascades down through the organization. Everybody's aware of what we want to get to revenue wise, but then maybe there's different geographical divisions. Maybe there's different sales channels. Everybody then has their own metrics for their sales channels that cascade up to the top. So making sure that they're the right ones, that they cascade through the organization, and that they are measurable, so that we can look at that on a lot of them, again, financial, so that when you're looking at things at the end of the month, end of the quarter, that you can measure against them there.
Dude, we've talked about so many great things. I every time you start talking about like Under Armour and your experiences and what you've done, I can't help but think your wife must be a saint for how much you must have given to that company to take it where you guys did.
Yeah, no, she was always biggest supporter of things. She was one of the first people that I hired. So we met when we were living in Baltimore. She actually went to the University of Maryland. I went to a smaller school called Loyola College. And when we had met after college and had both graduated and had met through a mutual friend that went to Maryland. And so we started dating in that there. And then eventually when I was coming back to Canada, we got more serious. And so she came back with me. She's from Syracuse, from upstate New York. So kind of moving her closer to home and that as well. So we moved back here and got engaged and hadn't been married yet, but she wanted to find a job. But she was American. She couldn't work. We weren't married yet. So I ended up hiring her through the US company, and she was an HR director in the US. So she came up and she was helping set up all the benefits and hire people. And so she was the first one one of the first employees of the business in Canada, and ended up working there for 9 years, I think. After our
So she was working with you the whole time you guys built Under Armour. It's like you guys built your own business here.
Yeah, for that part of it. So it was, she was always my biggest supporter, everything, and in some ways I used to say like she enabled me to do things, and that doesn't sound right, but like just the level of support allowed me to kind of go and, go again and execute the things that I wanted to do from a professional standpoint. And, it afforded us the opportunity to pick up, and 2 young kids, our son Luke and daughter Sophie were 2 and 4 when we moved over to Europe. So it afforded us an opportunity to go on as much as a professional challenge for me, it was a family adventure to go and live over there for a few years. And, didn't have a car. We just rode bikes everywhere around Amsterdam.
It's a great spot. Eh?
Oh, it was awesome.
It's awesome.
But no, she was always has been, still is kind of biggest supporter of things. And, but yeah, no, it was fun just being able to kind of work together. And I look back and be like, how did we do that for so long? Like, we'd spend all day together because we were working like 10, 12-hour days, and then we'd come home, and I don't know if we talked about work or what we talked about, but everything, always supported things. And especially the latter years when, it was a lot of travel. I was still living here in Toronto, but commuting to Baltimore, and that commute became, from every couple of weeks to every week, to then weeks at a time. And ultimately that's what, made the tough decision to leave, was just having, young kids and family and that at home. And I was never around. And before that window closed, I had to make a decision. So it was literally right before COVID, made the decision to take a step away, and not to go and work anywhere else, but just to come home and be more present as a husband and a dad. And don't regret it, but definitely miss the competitive aspect of business, at Under Armour, but, more so miss the team and the brand and the people that, got a chance to do it with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, you're a huge part, an integral part of building that brand all over the world. And I can't imagine what it'd be like to leave that. That would be hard.
It was tough. Still, talk to from, Kevin Plank, the still chairman and chief brand officer, to others and stuff, other people still there, still keep in touch with everybody, and still a big, supporter of the brand, and still talked a lot with the people here in Canada that are running the ship north of the border. So still a good crew there. Yeah.
Well, dude, I mean, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. And I didn't know, I will say, I didn't know, like, in the Canada piece, like, that your wife was with you, like, working alongside you on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you essentially grew a business on your own up here, not on your own, obviously, but from 0 to 400 million. I mean, it's an unbelievable feat, and congratulations to you and success. And, it's obviously a testament to your leadership. And I appreciate you being here on the podcast. I don't think I could efficiently project to the audience how much of just an upstanding man and person you are, and your family. And it just really is a pleasure to have you. You're a role model for a lot of people, and anybody who has a business. How can people find you, by the way, actually, before I forget, because I often do.
I can share, I guess, email address or whatever it might be, or I guess,
or through the coaching company that you work for. A company.
It's called CEO Coaching International. So it's, number of coaches that, we coach clients all over the world. So, as much as I've got, a good book of business, I don't have, I live in Canada. I don't have any clients in Canada. So I'm traveling quite a bit in order to kind of stay connected with them.
Actually, do you find that happens a lot, that like the US, they're, just more competitive and more focused on winning and getting coaching, and more open to that. And maybe that's from sports being such a big piece of the American culture versus Canada, or no?
No, maybe a little bit. I think there's, I don't know, there's a different approach. I don't think it's they look maybe at coaching more than Canadians do. I just think culturally it's a little different. It's obviously evolved over the years, but it's funny. It opened my eyes to things when being in Europe, because I used to see things in the US as it was like, go. And it was like, live to work. And then living in Europe and enjoying the lifestyle over there, like, worked hard, but they worked to live is kind of how I took it. And, they would work hard, and they would get in, they would, wouldn't necessarily be in super early, but they would work as late as they needed to get stuff done. And they would get everything so they could take, enjoy their vacation in July or August or whenever it would be. So again, US, I always looked at it as live to work. Europe was kind of work to live. Canada was somewhere in between. It's kind of just something that just how I had picked it up. And I was very fortunate to kind of plug into a business in the US and was kind of maybe just put on this mindset of just kind of go and work hard. And, but at the same time, I think just my nature is to, be able to kind of be laid back and, be able to take time to step away and spend time with family and listen to music and play golf and do the things that we love to do.
Yeah. Hey, just one last question, actually, because I thought about it earlier and you reminded me just now when you were talking about that work to live, but what's your take on landscape change with COVID and now that we're through the post-pandemic, and where do you see the landscape of workforce and people? And
I think it's definitely continues to evolve. I think obviously the big question is, or the big thing that's changed is just, the whole remote to hybrid and back to work, not back to work. And I think that varies based on industry, based on company. So that's a big thing. I look at it and I'm like, man, I love being in a boardroom. I love sitting and having a good whiteboard session and stuff like that. And just being able to kind of, put info out there and strategize with the team. And I think it can be done. And there's new ways to do that remotely, but it's definitely different as far as how it goes now. But, maybe a little bit of there was a shift, I know, within, call it that retail industry. There was obviously a big shift when everything was shut down and things went on to direct to consumer and onto online. And I think that's, maybe come back now and, you see retail, some retail starts to do well, but it still has its challenges in that at its time. But I think depending on the industry, but again, it's more reason just to make sure that you're understanding your consumer, you have a plan, because it's, shit's changing, constantly. And you got to be you got to be able to adapt. You got to be ready to go. It's, it's like sports. When something happens, you got to be able to call an audible and know what to do next. I think business, that applies the same thing. Just, be able to be responsive and reactive to things. Be a leader, make sure everybody knows, why we're changing, what we're doing. And just continue to build a plan and execute the plan.
Well, with AI too, I mean, things are going to change so much. And do you have any idea or insight on, and I'm asking about Under Armour, but just the retail space, I guess, but how much, when you're talking to these guys, like how much has come back to the retail in that sector or that business, and where it's at and where they expect it to go?
I think it obviously varies on the retail, but some retailers are still putting up, retailers are putting up record numbers, just based on, based on decisions that they made to best connect to the consumer through COVID, to then once, consumers have come back after COVID and what they're doing to kind of bring people into stores, shop online, all these things. So you continue to see them come back and, do great things. I think it's in some ways it's harder for brands at times, because in some areas, private labels and that has come up. You see Amazon, kind of on and taking certain, market share businesses. So there's definitely things that influence it differently. But again, that's why you gotta have a plan, is figure out, how are you going to go about things differently? What is going to be your point of differentiation as you're trying to drive a business forward?
Yeah, there's no question. I don't think there's any more. Well, I mean, having a plan's always been the right thing to do, but moving forward with the way technology is changing and AI is changing business, you need to have a plan now, or else you could find yourself out of business, before you lose market share. Now it could be a bullet to the brain.
Yeah. You got to stay a step ahead out there, because there's, so many other competitors that are out there, trying to do the same thing. So what's your point of difference? What's your, unique selling proposition that's going to kind of put you in the consumer's eyes?
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks so much for coming. I love the conversation. I love having you around. You're an awesome guy. Anytime I get to spend with you or chat with you is like, I always walk away with something. And thank you very much for being here. Thanks for taking your time to come up. And then let's go out and have some fun, actually.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come in. I love talking shop, whether it's around sports, around music, around business. So just being able to sit and spend time with a great guy like yourself. And, we seem to always be in passing, at other times. So being able to sit down and chat through things like this is awesome. We got to do it more. That's
the problem with having two busy guys. You can't get together as much, but I'd love to have you back. If you ever want to just come back and shoot the shit we're close. And then, we'll just shoot the breeze and talk business and talk about stuff. We've been talking about having some online, like a live online stuff with some of our listeners. They present some business problems and have people, with experience to come in and, help them pitch and catch on some thinking and of their own business. So if you're interested in doing some of that, maybe we get together on that.
No, that would be great. I would love that.
Awesome, man.
Cool.
Thanks again for being here. I appreciate
Thanks,
it, brother.
Likewise.
Cheers.